5,000 years ago, in the tropical forests of what is now Ecuador, people were already crushing cacao seeds, mixing them with water, and consuming the result as something sacred. Today, that same ingredient generates over $130 billion every single year. But the journey from jungle ritual to the wrapper in your pocket is the strangest, bloodiest, and most unlikely origin story of any food on Earth. Most people know chocolate as a comfort, a pleasure, something you reach for without thinking. What almost nobody knows is what it cost, in treasure, in blood, in centuries of obsession, to become that. This is the real history. The true beginning is further back than most chocolate histories dare to go. Researchers recovered starch grains, theobromine residues, and ancient DNA from ceramic vessels found in what is now Ecuador, the oldest confirmed archaeological evidence of cacao use anywhere on Earth, dated to roughly 5,300 years ago. That places it before the construction of the Giza pyramids. The civilization that first brought cacao into something resembling organized cultural practice was the Olmec, widely considered the mother culture of Mesoamerica, established in the humid tropical lowlands, flanking the Gulf of Mexico from around 1500 BC onward. These were the builders of those enigmatic massive stone heads, some exceeding 20 tons. Cacao trees grew in the shade of the surrounding rainforest, and the Olmec worked out a remarkable process for what those trees produced. A mature cacao pod, roughly the dimensions of a small papaya, contains 30 to 40 seeds embedded in a bittersweet white pulp. What the Olmec discovered was that fermentation unlocked the chemistry. Let the pulp ferment, then dry and roast the seeds inside, grind them into a dense paste, and the result produced a drink with no obvious equivalent in nature. Bitter, layered, faintly astringent, and undeniably powerful. When the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus formally classified it in 1753, he reached for a name that captured what the people who had always grown it already knew. Theobroma cacao, from the Greek for food of the gods. Chemical residues in pottery from the Ulua Valley in Honduras push cacao beverage use back to around 1400 BC. For the Olmec, this drink was not a refreshment. It occupied the space between the human and the divine. As Olmec civilization declined, their understanding of cacao, how to grow it, prepare it, and what it meant, moved through Mesoamerican exchange networks over subsequent centuries, reaching a civilization that would take it somewhere the Olmec had never imagined. The Maya received cacao and made it theological. Ceramic vessels from northern Belize carry cacao residues dating to as early as 600 BC. By the height of classic Maya civilization, in the first millennium of the Common Era, cacao had been woven into the architecture of existence: birthrights, marriage ceremonies, funerary offerings, prayers. It appears in hieroglyphic inscriptions and in mural paintings. Sacred Maya texts describe cacao as present at the moment of creation, alongside the maize that formed the first human beings, evidence of how thoroughly the bean had been worked into cosmological thinking. Maya chocolate shared almost nothing with what fills the shelves of a modern supermarket. No sugar, no milk, no softness. The preparation was a thick, sharp liquid. Ground cacao paste dissolved with water, then cut with cornmeal, dried chili peppers, and vanilla. The serving method was a ritual in itself. A servant would raise one vessel high and pour the liquid in a thin, controlled stream down into a second vessel below. The whole exercise aimed at producing a dense cap of dark, fragrant foam. That foam was not decoration. Archaeological evidence suggests vessels were specifically designed to generate and preserve it. The foam was the point. But the most consequential thing the Maya did with cacao had nothing to do with drinking it. They monetized it. Cacao beans circulated as currency across Mesoamerica with a well-understood exchange rate. A turkey ran about 100 beans. A small dugout canoe cost perhaps twice that. A human slave could be purchased for around 1,000. The Florentine Codex, compiled by Spanish missionaries in the 16th century, drawing on Mexica testimony, records that the finest spiced cacao beverages were restricted to nobles and warriors. Not a luxury for everyone, but a marker of where power resided. When a northern empire rose to dominate the region, it looked at the cacao groves of the lowlands with something that resembled hunger. By the 15th century, cacao was the most coveted commodity in the region, and the Aztec Empire had a fundamental geographic problem. Tenochtitlan and the highland plateau surrounding it sit above 7,000 feet of elevation. Cacao trees require persistent heat, high ambient humidity, protective canopy shade, and consistent rainfall. The Aztec heartland provided none of these. The most formidable empire in the Americas could not grow a single cacao pod within its own borders. The solution was imperial. The Aztecs conquered the tropical lowland provinces where cacao flourished and converted that subjugation into a tribute system. Enormous quantities of cacao beans were transported into Tenochtitlan from subject territories, a logistical feat conducted without wheeled carts, on mountain trails, carried by human porters and the occasional dog, since those were the only available draft animals. At the center of this redistribution system sat the Emperor Montezuma II, reportedly served cacao in vessels of hammered gold. The Aztec preparation, referred to in Nahuatl as chocolatl, was consumed cold or at ambient temperature, still spiced, still frothed, still bearing no resemblance to anything produced in a modern factory. Aztec cosmology held that the feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl had delivered cacao to humanity as a divine gift. Warriors consumed it before combat. Priests incorporated it into ceremony. Those chosen for sacrifice were given it as a final sacrament, comfort, or perhaps communion, at the threshold between worlds. Then in 1502, during his fourth voyage, Columbus and his crew became the first Europeans on record to encounter cacao beans. They observed the local population handling the seeds with unusual deliberation, but did not pursue the question. Columbus brought specimens back to Spain, where they generated no particular curiosity. Someone coming afterward would grasp what he had failed to understand. Hernán Cortés landed on the Mexican coast in 1519, commanding roughly 500 soldiers. The Aztec Empire had ceased to exist by 1521. When Cortés and his men tasted chocolatl at the Aztec court, the response was largely dismissal. Early Spanish accounts described the drink as suitable for livestock rather than civilized men. Yet Cortés grasped without hesitation what he was really looking at: the monetary foundation of a continental empire compressed into a bitter seed. After the conquest, the Spanish began shipping cacao back to the Iberian Peninsula and expanded cultivation across New Spain. The colonial territory formalized in 1535, requiring indigenous populations to work cacao farms as part of their tribute obligations to the crown. The tree the gods had supposedly given to humanity became an instrument of colonial extraction. What happened next was not planned. In the colonial kitchens and convents of Guatemala and Mexico, cooks working with local and imported ingredients began altering the preparation. Caribbean sugarcane went into the drink. Cinnamon followed. The serving temperature shifted from cold to warm. In making those adjustments, they created something that European taste could not dismiss. The modified recipe did not travel immediately. Spain maintained it as a court privilege for decades, not through any formal secrecy statute, but through the natural inertia of aristocratic exclusivity. While the rest of Europe remained unaware, the Spanish nobility quietly deepened its dependence on hot chocolate. Within 2 centuries of cacao reaching Spain, Madrid was reportedly consuming several tons per year, all of it circulating within a closed elite. That enclosure, eventually, could not hold. The knowledge spread through royal marriages, diplomatic gifts, and the reliable human inability to keep a genuinely pleasurable discovery private. By the early 17th century, chocolate had reached the courts of Italy, France, and England. In France, the wife of Louis XIV, Maria Theresa of Spain, who had grown up drinking cacao daily, was said to consume it multiple times a day, and rumor attributed her famously darkened teeth partly to the habit. The French court followed her appetite. Hot chocolate, sweetened with Caribbean sugar and enriched with milk, became the fashionable drink of Versailles, served in fine porcelain cups, lingered over, a signal of sophistication that nobles competed to display. In England, the first dedicated chocolate establishment opened in London in 1657. These were exclusive venues that functioned simultaneously as social club, news exchange, and informal brokerage. Wealthy men gathered to discuss trade, share political intelligence, and drink cup after cup of the sweetened preparation. The price of admission served as a filter. White's, which began in 1693 as a hot chocolate shop, eventually became one of the most restricted gentlemen's clubs in the world and continues to operate in London today. For most of this period, chocolate remained exclusively a beverage. Producing it from raw cacao demanded intensive manual effort, roasting, shelling, and grinding by hand into a thick paste that dissolved reluctantly and left an oily, granular residue in the cup. The grittiness was a known problem, an accepted cost for those wealthy enough to afford it, and a practical barrier keeping it beyond everyone else. Physicians across Europe recommended it confidently for fatigue, low spirits, and digestive complaints. Chocolate had captured the attention of the powerful across an entire continent, but its fundamental texture problem, the grittiness, the grease, the difficulty of preparation, had yet to meet the right engineer. In 1828, a Dutch cocoa producer named Casparus van Houten registered a patent for a hydraulic press that would remake the economics of chocolate without anyone quite realizing it at the time. Raw cacao paste is roughly half fat, a natural oil called cocoa butter. That fat content was the source of the grittiness problem. It made chocolate drinks heavy, poorly soluble, and unpleasant in texture. Van Houten's press could extract most of that cocoa butter under hydraulic pressure, leaving behind a dry, compressed cake of cocoa solids. Pulverize the cake, and the result was something genuinely new, a fine, light cocoa powder that dissolved cleanly in water or milk and produced a smooth, repeatable cup without manual grinding or skilled preparation. The Van Houten family also refined a method of treating cocoa powder with alkaline salts, which neutralized much of the natural bitterness and produced a powder darker in color, milder in flavor, and even more readily soluble. The process is still called Dutching today, and you have encountered it on the label of every tin of cocoa you have ever opened. These two developments together accomplished something their inventor may not have fully anticipated. They collapsed the price of chocolate. The ingredient that had operated as luxury currency for centuries could now be manufactured faster, in larger volumes, at a small fraction of its previous cost. Ordinary households, for the first time in 5,000 years of cacao history, could afford a cup, but the press had also done something structurally significant. By separating cocoa butter from cocoa solids, it had created two usable ingredients instead of one, and a company in Bristol was already thinking about what to do when you recombined them in a completely different configuration. In 1847, a British manufacturer called J.S. Fry & Sons arrived at an insight that reframed 3,000 years of cacao history in a single production run. The logic was almost embarrassingly direct. The press had extracted cocoa butter from cacao paste to make powder. What if you took that same cocoa butter, the smooth, silky fat the press had separated out, and blended it back with cocoa powder and sugar? Not to produce a beverage, to produce something with enough structural integrity to be molded. Something that would harden at room temperature into a solid shape you could hold between your fingers. They called it eating chocolate. It worked. 3,000 years of cacao had produced a drink, consumed in ceremonies, in palaces, in the exclusive clubs of London. One afternoon in a Bristol factory changed the object category permanently. Chocolate became something you could break into segments, wrap in paper, slip into a coat pocket, and eat without preparation, without a kitchen, without a cup, wherever you happened to be. John Cadbury had opened his Birmingham grocery in 1824, selling drinking chocolate and cocoa. But the invention of the solid bar shifted everything beneath him. Chocolate was no longer a prepared beverage, requiring utensils and heat. It was a portable manufactured object. And portable objects, as every merchant in history has understood, reach a far wider market than anything requiring a kitchen to serve. The 30 years that followed produced a compression of invention that reshaped the entire food industry. In 1866, Cadbury launched Cocoa Essence, after acquiring a Dutch cocoa press, the first genuinely unadulterated drinking chocolate widely available in Britain. 2 years later, in 1868, Richard Cadbury designed the first known heart-shaped confectionery box specifically for Valentine's Day, fusing a commercial product to a holiday in a single gesture that has never been undone. In 1875, Cadbury released what is recognized as the first chocolate Easter egg, embedding the product permanently into the Christian calendar of seasonal giving. Also in 1875, a Swiss confectioner named Daniel Peter of Vevey had been wrestling for years with a problem that seemed almost philosophical in its stubbornness. How do you incorporate milk into chocolate? Milk contains water. Water causes chocolate to seize. The fat and solids separate. The texture becomes grainy and unworkable. Peter had no solution. Then his neighbor, Henri Nestlé, showed him something he had recently developed: powdered condensed milk, from which the water had already been removed. Peter incorporated it into his chocolate formula. Milk chocolate became a manufacturable product. Nestlé entered commercial chocolate distribution through export arrangements built on the Peter and Cola partnership, and that proximity between neighbors in a Swiss town became the foundational event of one of the largest food companies in the world. 4 years after Peter's breakthrough, in 1879, a Swiss chocolatier named Rodolphe Lindt left his mixing machine running through the night unintentionally. When he returned the following morning, the extended mechanical agitation had transformed the texture. The resulting chocolate melted against the tongue rather than sitting waxy in the palm. Company tradition holds this accidental overnight run as the discovery of conching, the prolonged mechanical working of chocolate that is still the standard technique in fine production today. In under 50 years from the Van Houten press, chocolate had evolved from a gritty aristocratic drink into milk chocolate bars, heart-shaped gift boxes, Easter eggs, and a texture that could make a composed adult close their eyes involuntarily. Milton Hershey founded the Hershey Chocolate Company in 1894. His understanding of the market was precise and unsentimental. The Swiss were producing better chocolate, and he knew it. He did not intend to compete on refinement. He intended to compete on reach. In 1900, Hershey's milk chocolate bars went on sale at prices between 2 and 10 cents, depending on size. 2 cents. The price was the entire point. He constructed a purpose-built industrial town in Pennsylvania, with Chocolate Avenue and Cocoa Avenue as its main arteries, organized entirely around a factory built to produce chocolate at a scale and cost that made it accessible to people who had never tasted it before. In 1907, he introduced the Hershey's Kiss, that distinctively shaped foil-wrapped piece that became one of the most recognizable manufactured confections in American commercial history. Hershey's approach democratized chocolate in the United States in a way no European producer had managed or attempted. The affordable bar reached factory workers, school children, rural families, anyone with a few coins and access to a general store. But behind every cheap bar sat a supply chain, and that supply chain carried costs that were not reflected in the price and were not being discussed in public. If you want to keep following stories like this one, subscribing takes 2 seconds. This is the section most chocolate documentaries compress into a paragraph and then move past quickly. The supply chain behind every chocolate bar originates in cacao farming, and cacao farming has carried brutal labor economics from its earliest colonial iteration. When New Spain was formalized in 1535, colonial authorities expanded cacao cultivation by requiring indigenous populations to work the farms as tribute owed to the crown. The tree that Aztec cosmology had designated a divine gift became a colonial tax instrument imposed on the people who had always grown it. 4 centuries later, the underlying logic had proven remarkably durable. In 1909, the British chocolate manufacturers Cadbury Brothers, J.S. Fry, Rowntree & Sons, and Stolwerk coordinated a boycott of cacao imports from the Portuguese island territory of São Tomé and Príncipe, following documented allegations of forced labor on its plantations. The companies behind the Valentine's box, the Easter egg, and the first chocolate bar had been sourcing cacao from operations relying on coerced workers, and it required a journalist's investigation and sustained public pressure to force a response. Today, approximately 70% of the world's cacao is grown in West Africa, concentrated in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. A survey conducted by NORC at the University of Chicago during the 2018-19 harvest season, covering more than 2,800 household heads and over 5,500 children across both countries, estimated that 1.56 million children were engaged in child labor in cacao production. The US Department of Labor's 2024 findings continue to list cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire among goods associated with documented child labor risks. In 2001, the major chocolate companies signed the Harkin-Engel Protocol, committing to eliminate the worst forms of child labor from their supply chains through industry standards and certification programs. The deadlines written into that agreement were subsequently missed and extended. Ghana introduced a national cacao traceability system in 2024 and distributed 2.5 million tree seedlings. Concrete steps, but the gap between a pledged clean supply chain and a verified one remains measurable and real. The farmers who cultivate cacao, often working plots smaller than 5 acres in some of the poorest agricultural regions on Earth, typically cannot afford to purchase the finished product their labor makes possible. The world's most widely craved comfort food sits at the end of one of its least comfortable supply chains. The global chocolate market today exceeds $130 billion annually, a figure larger than the entire GDP of more than 100 countries. What makes the obsession structurally permanent is not nostalgia or tradition. It is biology, exploited by commercial engineering. Cacao delivers theobromine and caffeine, mild stimulants that produce a measurable, gentle elevation in mood and alertness. Combine that chemistry with refined sugar and cocoa butter in the right ratio, and you produce a food that melts at almost exactly human body temperature, releasing fat and sweetness simultaneously in a way no other ingredient can replicate. The melt is not incidental. It is what closes the loop between craving and reward. Every time, reliably. Then attach that chemistry to the calendar. Valentine's Day, Easter, Halloween, Christmas. Each one anchored to chocolate through gestures that were originally commercial decisions and have since become cultural reflexes. Add wartime rations that made chocolate part of the American soldier's standard kit, embedding it in collective memory as comfort under duress. Place it at the checkout counter, where a person is depleted and their resistance is at its lowest ebb. None of that placement is accidental. It is the accumulated result of 2 centuries of deliberate market engineering. Every barrier that historically kept chocolate out of ordinary hands was dismantled by a specific invention. A hydraulic press that separated fat from powder, a mixing machine left running overnight, a Pennsylvania factory town designed around a 2-cent price point, a foil wrapper small enough to slip into any pocket. Bitterness was refined into sweetness. Scarcity became mass production. Sacred ritual became daily habit. And right now, chocolate is almost certainly sitting somewhere in your kitchen, in a drawer, a cabinet, a bag from the last time you were near a register and reached for something without much deliberation. 5,000 years from Ecuador to that moment. The most unlikely food in human history, still waiting. From a sacred jungle drink crushed by Olmec hands 5,000 years ago, to a $130 billion industry whose supply chain still carries the same coercive logic that began under Spanish colonial rule. The history of chocolate is the history of what happens when humans encounter something that feels too good to release. Empires conquered provinces to control it. Chemists rebuilt its texture from scratch. Industrialists priced it down to 2 cents. And across every century and every transformation, nobody who encountered it could bring themselves to stop. What surprised you most? That cacao was a monetary currency? Or what is still happening on the farms today? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more hidden histories of the food on your table, subscribe. A new story every week.